They told you to smile, to sit straight, to speak softer, to laugh only when it's safe. They taught you how to shrink, how to disappear inside a version of yourself that made them comfortable. They applauded the version of you that played along, said yes when it wanted to scream no, stayed quiet when it wanted to burn everything to the ground. They didn't want you. They wanted a puppet, a polite echo, a copy of their comfort zone. So you wore the mask. At first, it felt like a costume, a role, something you could slip in and out of. But over time, it began to dig into your skin. You wore it so long that even your own reflection looked like a stranger. You began to forget how your real voice even sounded. And every time you tried to show a glimpse of your true self, they flinched, or walked away, or laughed. That's when it hits you. They never loved you. They loved the performance. The worst part, you started apologizing for the cracks in the mask, for the moments you slipped up and showed who you really were, for the silence when you had nothing left to say, for the fire they lit in you, but blamed you for burning with. You apologized for being real, because that's what they made you believe. That being raw, emotional, intense, direct was ugly. That your depth was too deep, your feelings too much, your mind too loud. They labeled your darkness as broken. They were wrong. But what happens when the mask you wear starts to kill the soul beneath it? You bent, broke, and bled just to be accepted. You became what they needed, even when it tore pieces off of you. You adjusted your tone, your dreams, your truth, just to fit into rooms that were never built for you in the first place. You smiled through pain. You stayed quiet when your soul was screaming. You shrank your own spirit so others could feel tall. You were never too much. They were just too little. And still, they left. Or worse, they stayed and drained you. You thought if you just loved them harder, if you gave them more of your time, your loyalty, your patience, they'd finally see you, really see you. But they didn't. They only saw what they wanted to see. The version of you that pleased them, that obeyed, that didn't cause trouble, that said yes when everything inside you was begging you to say no. You became invisible the moment you stopped performing. Isn't that strange? When you were pretending, they applauded. But the moment you were honest about your pain, your truth, your boundaries, they called you difficult, dramatic, too cold, too angry, too selfish. Funny how they don't mind the fire when it keeps them warm. Call it destructive the second you use it to protect yourself. It hurts, doesn't it? To realize that so many people you loved only loved the act. Family who turned their back the second you stopped being the version of you that fit into their broken image of normal. Friends who disappeared the moment you said something they didn't want to hear. Lovers who said they loved your mind till your mind stopped agreeing with them. And somehow, you still blamed yourself. You looked in the mirror and wondered, what's wrong with me? Let me tell you something. There's nothing wrong with you. There never was. The problem wasn't that you were too much. The problem was that they were never meant to carry something so real, so raw, so unfiltered. They weren't strong enough to love someone who doesn't hide, who doesn't pretend, who doesn't apologize for bleeding where it hurts. And now, you're standing in the ashes of who you used to be, questioning whether the fire was your fault. Maybe it wasn't destruction. Maybe it was rebirth. So tell me, who really deserves an apology here? You, or the world that never saw you? You've been hurt in ways you don't talk about. Used by people who promised to protect you. Left behind by those who swore they'd never walk away. And every time it happened, you stayed quiet because you didn't want to be seen as weak, as bitter, as broken. But you were never weak. You were trying, and that's what they'll never understand. Pain doesn't show failure, it shows effort. You only bleed that deep when you care that deeply. You only break when you built something real. People who feel nothing don't get hurt. People who don't try don't carry scars. But you carry scars like stories, like maps of the places your heart has been. Every mark on you means something. The moment you kept breathing when it felt like the air was poison. The time you stood back up when your soul was begging you to stay down. That's not weakness, that's proof. Proof that you gave what you had. Proof that you kept going when most people would have quit. You didn't just survive the storm. You were the storm, learning how to rebuild in the rain. They mocked your silence. But silence was your scream. It was the sound of your restraint, of your self-control, of your dignity. Because you could have lashed out, you could have exploded, but you didn't. You sat there, eyes full of rage, chest full of fire, and you said nothing. You think that makes you soft? A number that makes you a weapon, a quiet one. You were hurting, but you still showed up. You were shaking, but you still smiled. You felt empty, but you poured into others anyway. And they never noticed. They never thanked you. They never saw what it cost you just to be kind. But you kept doing it. You tried to be good, to be enough, to be everything they needed. They left. So now you look at yourself like a failure. But you're not a failure. You're proof. Proof that love, even when it isn't returned, is still noble. Proof that kindness, even when it's stepped on, still matters. Proof that effort, even when unrecognized, still makes you powerful. The world doesn't reward people like you, not at first. The world worships the loud, the fake, the shiny distractions. But in the silence, when the noise fades, only the real ones remain. Only the ones who felt it all and didn't let it turn them to ash. They call you cold now because you stopped giving them what they never deserved. But what they don't know is that the cold came from the fire they left you in. The numbness came from the betrayal. The distance came from the years of being misunderstood, mishandled, misused. You adapted. You're not a victim anymore. You're becoming something else. Something dangerous. Something deliberate. Something they don't know how to define. Because when you've carried that much pain for that long, you stop needing to prove yourself. You stop needing to be seen. You stop needing to be liked. You start needing one thing: freedom. Freedom from the performance. Freedom from the guilt. Freedom from the chains they built out of their expectations. You stop saying, "I'm sorry." You start saying, "This is who I am. Take it or leave." And if they leave, let them. If they talk, let them. Because the people who really see you, the ones who know what it costs to stay soft in a hard world, they don't need to be convinced. They just recognize you. They see the storms in your eyes and call it beauty. They see the steel in your voice and call it truth. They see the silence in your soul and call it peace. You're not too intense. You're just not shallow. You're not too emotional. You're just not fake. You're not too honest. You're just not afraid. But they are. They're afraid of someone who can't be controlled with shame, who doesn't bend to guilt, who doesn't flinch when the world raises its voice. You don't flinch anymore. You don't explain anymore. You don't apologize anymore. Because now you know. Pain doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're still alive. It means you haven't gone numb like them. It means your heart, despite it all, still beats. So let them laugh. Let them walk away. Let them say you changed. Maybe you did. But maybe you didn't become colder. Maybe you became clearer. Maybe you weren't too much. Maybe they were just too empty. They thought they broke you. They saw you alone, quiet, fading into the background. And they thought that meant you were done. They mistook your silence for surrender. They saw the way you stopped chasing, stopped begging, stopped explaining, and they smiled, thought they won. But they didn't know what happens in the dark. They didn't know that some things don't die when left alone. They evolve. You stopped speaking because words were wasted on people who never listened. You stopped crying because tears only watered their ego. You stopped explaining because they twisted everything you said into another reason to blame you. So you went quiet. You disappeared. And in that silence, something started to grow. Something wild. Something sharp. They tried to tame you with guilt. Tried to train you to stay small, stay soft, stay silent. But the silence didn't soften you. It didn't make you safer. It made you a wolf. Not the kind that howls for attention. The kind that moves in shadows. Watches. Learns. Waits. They didn't know that cold doesn't kill the wolf. It builds him. You lived in that cold. Slept in it. Breathed it. Learned how to move in it. And one day, without warning, you stopped caring. You stopped caring about their approval, their attention, their applause. The very things they used to control you suddenly meant nothing. You looked in the mirror and saw it. The cracks they left behind didn't make you fragile. They made you real. You weren't breaking. You were being forged. Cracked mirrors still reflect the truth. Steel isn't soft, and neither are you anymore. They say wolves are dangerous, but only when they're cornered. Only when they're betrayed. Only when they've been hunted long enough to stop running. And you? You stopped running a long time ago. Now you walk, calm, cold, unbothered. Because the wolf doesn't need to prove anything. He knows what he is. He knows what he's capable of. He doesn't roar like a lion. He doesn't need the noise. He just waits. And when the time comes, he strikes. That's you now. You used to try to be kind. You used to beg to be understood. You used to break yourself into pieces, hoping someone would finally love you for all of them. Now you sit in silence while they squirm, wondering what version of you they'll meet today. The one that used to beg? Gone. The one that used to explain? Buried. The one that still smiles, still watches, still walks the room like it owes you something. That's the wolf. They don't fear you because you're angry. They fear you because you're still. Because you say nothing and somehow say everything. They can't read you anymore. And that's the point. You've become what they whispered about behind your back. The one they said changed. The one they said became cold. And they're right. Not because you lost your heart, because you found your spine. Now you speak only when necessary. You move only when it matters. You strike only when it hurts. And they'll never see it coming, because they still think you're the same person who cried in silence, who begged them not to leave, who apologized for being human. But you're not. You're not their victim anymore. You're not the fragile version of yourself that begged for mercy. You're the lesson they'll never forget. Because wolves don't apologize for how sharp their teeth are. They don't say sorry for surviving. They don't soften just to be loved. And neither should you. They thought your silence meant weakness. They thought your calm was submission. But they forgot. The quiet ones are always the ones to watch. Because while they were busy talking, you were building. While they were laughing, you were learning. While they moved on, you were becoming something they couldn't touch. They tried to shame you into being soft. But you chose silence instead. And that silence, that stillness, that cold, calm, steady presence, it's not emptiness. It's power. Now you walk differently. You speak differently. You breathe like someone who doesn't chase anymore. When they look at you now, they don't see the same person they left behind. They see a reflection of their mistake. Because you weren't broken. You were awakening. When you stop chasing, they start noticing. There's something about silence that terrifies people. It's not the absence of words. It's the presence of meaning without explanation. Because when you stop talking, they have to listen to the echo of their own actions. You used to explain everything. You begged them to understand. You defended your pain, your reasons, your heart. You thought if you just said the right words, they'd finally get it. That they'd finally see how deeply you hurt. But they never wanted to understand. They just wanted control. And silence takes that away from them. Silence is a weapon, a shield, a language only the strong can speak. Because it's easy to shout, it's easy to cry, it's easy to explode. But to sit there, completely still, and watch them fall apart on their own, that's power. There was a man, loyal, quiet, honest. He gave everything he had to someone who promised not to leave. And when betrayal came, it didn't come loud. It came in silence, in lies unspoken, in actions that screamed what their lips never said. But he didn't react. He didn't yell. He didn't beg. He didn't demand to know why. He just walked away. Not with hatred, not with noise, but with stillness. And the one who betrayed him. They laughed at first, felt victorious, thought they'd won. Then the days passed. No texts, no calls, no drama, just silence. And it drove them mad. Because silence forces people to face themselves, to sit in the truth of what they did, without your voice to drown it out. They wanted a reaction, a scene, something to make them the victim. But when you give them nothing, they have to face everything. Walking away doesn't just hurt more than yelling. It lasts longer. It lingers. It rots the memory. Because a scream fades. But silence stays. It fills the space between their guilt and their pride. It grows like a shadow. You don't have to slam doors. You don't have to explain your pain. You don't have to give them the gift of your emotion one more time. You owe yourself peace. You owe them nothing. Let them wonder. Let them guess. Let them talk to a version of you that no longer exists. Because once someone shatters your trust, they don't deserve to hear your voice explain how it felt. They can sit in the ruins. You don't owe closure to the ones who shattered you. Pressure has a way of showing you what you're made of. It doesn't ask. It forces. It backs you into corners. It takes everything soft and familiar and replaces it with silence, shadows, and isolation. But that's where you changed, isn't it? Not in the light, not in comfort, not when things were easy. No. You were built in the dark. While they laughed and lived without consequence, you were being shaped by the weight of expectations, the weight of betrayal, the weight of feeling everything too much while pretending to feel nothing at all. They called you sensitive, said you were too emotional, too reactive, but they never knew what it cost you just to hold it all in. To bite your tongue until it bled. To smile when your world was falling apart. To breathe through fire. But fire didn't burn you. It revealed you. It melted everything that wasn't real. It stripped away the masks, the noise, the lies you told yourself just to survive. And underneath it all was you. Unpolished, untouched, unapologetic. You see, everyone wants a diamond, but no one wants it to be crushed like coal. No one wants the darkness, the heat, the pressure that makes something indestructible. But you lived there. You endured it. And when it was done, when the pressure stopped, when the fire faded, you didn't come out weak. You didn't come out broken. You came out rare. Not perfect, not shiny, but real, solid, unshakable. They don't recognize you now, do they? The ones who once told you to dim your light now squint to look at you. The ones who mocked your silence now hang on every word you say. The ones who thought you'd never make it now wonder how you did. And you say nothing. Because diamonds don't explain how they were made. They just shine. They just exist. You don't need their applause. You don't need their acceptance. Because you know who you are now. You were never fragile. You were just unfinished. The loneliness, the rejection, the nights you spent staring at the ceiling, wondering what was wrong with you. Those were part of the process, part of the shaping, part of the pressure. But the world doesn't see that part. They only see the outcome. They see you're calm and think you're cold. They see your confidence and call it arrogance. They see your silence and assume you have nothing to say. But you know the truth. You're not cold. You're measured. You're not arrogant. You're aware. You're not silent. You're calculating. Because once you've survived the fire, you stop fearing the heat. Once you've been crushed and didn't break, you stop apologizing for how strong you are now. You don't explain your glow to those who never saw your darkness. You don't carry guilt for being rare. You carry pride for becoming. Maybe that's what scares them. Not that you changed, but that you changed without them. That you healed in the quiet. That you rose alone. That they left you to burn. And somehow you came back forged. Now they don't know how to talk to you, how to reach you, how to hurt you. Because the old version of you, the one that needed them, is gone. And the version that remains, the one doesn't bend, doesn't beg, doesn't need to be understood. You weren't made for their comfort. You were made for resistance. You're the proof that pressure doesn't just destroy. Sometimes it creates. And now, when you look in the mirror, you don't see what they broke. You see what they couldn't. So let them keep their shallow peace. Let them keep their soft lives and hollow apologies. You've been through the fire, and you didn't come back asking for forgiveness. Would you apologize for being the only one who survived the fire? They want you to say sorry for changing, but it's them who stayed the same. You evolved, you burned, you crawled through your own wreckage and came out with your soul still intact. They stayed comfortable, stayed predictable, stayed entitled to the old version of you. The one who bent, who begged, who bled just to keep them close. They missed the moment you stopped needing them. They still think you're supposed to explain yourself. They still think your silence is a phase. That eventually you'll come crawling back with an apology, wrapped in soft words and lowered eyes. There is no apology coming. You don't owe them that. You don't owe anyone an apology for being real, for cutting through the performance and letting your truth walk free, for no longer smiling when you're bleeding, for no longer giving when it costs you peace, for no longer apologizing for who you've become, just because they're too afraid to meet the real you. You've carried guilt like a second skin, shame like a chain around your neck. Every time you grew, they called it betrayal. Every time you set a boundary, they called it attitude. Every time you protected your energy, they called it selfishness. But here's the truth. They weren't hurt by your growth. They were hurt because they could no longer control it. You built a monster inside you, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that refuses to be destroyed. The kind that doesn't flinch when abandoned. The kind that doesn't soften just to be accepted. The kind that sits in silence, unmoved, while the world scrambles to figure out what version of you they're dealing with. You became what they feared the moment you stopped needing to be liked. Let that sink in. You were never the villain. They just hated how loud your truth sounded in their silence. So now they rewrite the story. Now they say you changed. Now they say you became distant, cold, hard. But you know the truth. They weren't ready for someone who stopped saying yes out of fear. And that's the difference between you and them. You became something they can't manipulate. You stopped explaining your pain just to make them comfortable with what they did to you. You don't carry guilt anymore. Not for growing, not for healing, not for finally putting yourself first. Let them call you cold. Let them say you switched up. Let them stand at a distance, confused by the stillness where chaos used to live. You're not who you were, and you're never going back. Because you found power in stillness. You found clarity in silence. You found yourself in the wreckage of everything they tried to destroy. And now you let your presence do the talking. Now you let your absence do the punishing. Now you let your energy speak for you. You no longer write paragraphs to people who can't read between the lines. You no longer bleed to prove that your heart is still beating. And if that makes you the villain in their version of the story, so be it. Let them choke on your silence. You're done explaining. Revenge isn't always loud. It doesn't have to scream or burn things down. It doesn't come with fists or fury or broken glass. Real revenge, the kind that lasts, moves in silence. It rises while they're sleeping. It evolves while they laugh. It builds a throne in the shadows, brick by brick, with everything they thought would break you. You won't see me coming, but you'll feel me in your regrets. See, they expected you to crumble, to collapse under the weight of their absence, to beg, to fall apart. But instead, you disappeared. And in that disappearance, you rebuilt. You sharpened in private. You became colder, smarter, focused. While they danced in circles, chasing the next distraction, you were becoming untouchable. They thought the silence meant they won, that you had nothing left, that your stillness was defeat. But they forgot. Still waters run deep, and some storms make no sound until they strike. You didn't scream, you didn't fight, you just improved. And now your name tastes bitter in their mouth. Your memory sits in the back of their throat like a knife they can't swallow. They see you, thriving, unbothered, unreachable, and something inside them shatters. They don't miss you. They miss the version of themselves that felt powerful when you were small. But you're not small anymore. You're everything they said you'd never become. A ghost in designer skin. A legend built from silence. They remember every time they dismissed you. Every time they laughed when you were breaking. Every time they said you'd never be anything without them. And now, they say nothing. Because what could they say? You're living proof. Proof that healing isn't about forgiveness. It's about becoming the kind of person who no longer needs revenge. Because they already won. There was a man. Quiet. Forgettable. The kind they mocked at dinner tables. Left on red. Walked past without a second thought. He vanished one day. No goodbye, no message. Just gone. Years later, he returned. But he didn't come back to speak. He came back successful. Dressed in silence. Surrounded by power. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Because everyone who ever doubted him saw it in his eyes. The fire, the restraint, the control. He had become the very thing they couldn't destroy. And he walked past them like they never existed. They couldn't handle it. Because nothing hurts more than realizing you were the villain in someone else's origin story. And they didn't just survive you. They became immortal because of you. That's the revenge. Not screaming, not proving, just becoming. The best revenge. Being the ghost of the person they couldn't kill. You've worn too many masks for too long. Masks to keep the peace. Masks to be loved. Masks to survive in rooms that were never built for your truth. You learned how to fake calm while your inside screamed. How to smile when your heart was a battlefield. How to be soft when all you ever needed was to finally roar. But no more. No more masks. No more adjusting the volume of your soul just to make others comfortable. No more pretending to be less so they can feel more. Because this version of you, the raw one, the untamed one, the one that doesn't flinch anymore, that's the real one. The one that survived. The one they couldn't destroy, no matter how hard they tried to rewrite your script. You don't need to be understood. You need to be free. Free from the need to explain your silence. Free from the guilt of outgrowing people who wanted you small. Free from the weight of carrying their insecurities on your back like they were your burden. You owe no one an explanation for your healing. You owe no one softness after they taught you pain. And you owe no one a version of yourself that exists only to be digestible. Because real power is not being loud. It's being unreadable. It's smiling when they expect rage. It's walking away when they expect you to beg. It's being at peace when they thought they broke your soul. You are not here to perform anymore. Not for friends. Not for lovers. Not for family. Not for anyone. This is your evolution, your unveiling, your return to the self you buried beneath shoulds and sorries. You don't need to explain who you've become. The ones meant for you will recognize you by the fire in your silence. And the ones who don't, let them go. If they can't love you as you are, let them leave as they came, blind. Apologies are for mistakes, but you were never a mistake. You were raw, unfiltered, wild in a world that only knows how to love things it can cage. They tried to make you feel guilty for that, for existing too loudly, for feeling too deeply, for refusing to shrink into something polite. You are not their opinion of you. You are not the words they said behind your back. You are not the version of you they constructed to feel better about themselves. You are something else now. Your silence, once your prison, has become your throne. Where once you stayed quiet out of fear, now you stay quiet out of power. You speak only when the truth needs to cut. You move only when the ground needs shaking. You're not hiding anymore. You're ruling. And a king doesn't explain his crown. He wears it. You're calm because chaos trained you. You are still because storms raised you. You don't beg anymore because you remember what it felt like to starve with your hands wide open. Let them misunderstand you. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. You don't owe the world a softer version of your truth. Not anymore. They called you broken because they could not break you. They called you cold because you stopped burning for people who only watched you die in the fire. But look at you now, breathing, building, becoming. This is your peace, and your peace is not up for debate. So walk like you own the silence. Smile like you bury the old version of you with honor. And speak only when your truth needs a sword, not a sentence. Be unapologetically you. Let the world adjust or fall away. If you're hearing this right now, you already know you're not broken, you're not crazy, you're not too much. You're becoming. This world doesn't tell people like you how powerful they are, because it's terrified of what would happen if you ever truly realized it. But now you do. Now you remember. And when that memory comes back, so does the fire. So tell me, what part of you did they try to kill? Write it in the comments. Let it out. Let it bleed if it has to. Let the silence end here with someone who sees what they ignored. This is your space now. No masks, no pretending. Subscribe if you need more than shallow motivation. Subscribe if you're tired of being polite when all you really are is powerful. Subscribe if you're done apologizing for surviving, because this world doesn't need more nice people pretending. It needs real ones surviving.